Tales from the Whistling Pixie. Written as told by Fallon Loreseeker, the Silver Sword of Haverl. Fallon turned to Brom with a wide smile. Not just a bard, my large friend. Never just a bard. He turned back to the wall and began moving along it, his fingers tracing the carved reliefs as he read. Zavala held his staff high, following the half-elf's progress, and lightened the panels as he went. The carvings told a story: wars, migrations, the rise and fall of chieftains, the building of this very tomb. Fallon muttered quietly to himself as he read, occasionally pulling out his journal to scratch down a few notes. Brom stood near the altar, the presence of Azgaroth settling his nerves from the last chamber. "You're gonna be a while, ain't ya?" he asked, watching the bard move along the wall. "Not long, my friend. Just need a few quick notes, and then we'll head on," Fallon said, not taking his eyes off the wall. Zavala stayed close, studying the carvings almost as intently. Brom looked around anxiously. "Good. 'Cause me be starting to not like this place. Really starting to feel like a tomb," he said, glancing back the way they had come. "Me too," he whispered. His eyes caught the shape of another door set into the stone. He moved over to it. "You think the sword is through this?" he asked, studying it. The half-elf looked over at him. "Let's hope so. But if not, at least the journey was worth it for this room." He turned back and continued his studying. Zavala glanced over at the big man. "Go ahead. See if you can open it. That way, we can move on once Fallon is done." Brom looked back at him. "Nope. Maybe wait until you're done. Me not going to poke where me shouldn't be poking," he said, giving the wizard a serious look. The black-robed wizard laughed. "You know, for someone as large and with so many muscles, you are quite timid." Brom narrowed his eyes and gave Zavala a measured look. "Timid? No." He paused and dragged out the next word for effect. "Pardoned? Yes." The wizard looked at him, confused. "Pardon?" The large man's face scrunched in equal confusion. "Yeah, pardon. Being careful what you do. Pardon." Both the wizard and the bard chuckled. "Prudent," Zavala corrected slowly. "Prudent." Brom's eyes went wide. "That's what me said. Prudent." The other two exchanged a glance and went back to studying. An hour later, Fallon finished his notes, took a few rubbings from the wall, and stepped back with a smile of quiet satisfaction. "All right, Brom. Let's see to that door," he said, looking over to where the big man had been standing. Brom had sat down beside the door and nodded off. Fallon smiled and walked over, kicking the man's foot. "Not very prudent falling asleep in a place like this. You might just find yourself one of the guardians." Brom startled awake and blinked up at him. "Sorry. She got a little bored and tired waiting for you." He took the offered hand and hauled himself up to his feet. "But me be ready. Let's see to that door." Brom reached down and picked up his pack and maul. He looked at the other two and pushed the stone door. It opened easily. He let the other two enter first and followed close behind. The hall ran for only a few dozen feet. Fallon and Zavala both noticed something about the walls almost immediately. They weren't the same as the others. Old, yes, but not as old. This hall had been created after the rest of the tomb. "This hall isn't as old as the others," Fallon said over his shoulder. Zavala nodded, running a hand over the smooth surface. "It was created by magic. I can feel the residue." He paused. "Interesting. Was this Haverl a wielder of the arcane?" Fallon kept walking, answering over his shoulders. "No, but he had a friend who was a powerful wizard." "Really? Do you recall the wizard's name?" The half-elf stopped. Zavala's light had fallen on something at the end of the hall. A gilded door, gleaming as though the years had not touched it. "Dallastar," Fallon said quietly. and slowly approached. Zavala's eyes widened, his lips pursed in a slow Fallon tried the door. It didn't move. He ran his hand along the frame, found the lock, and crouched to examine it. He gazed back at the other two with a slight smile. "Thought you couldn't pick locks," Brom said. "I said I wasn't proficient," Fallon replied, already pulling out a small roll of tools from his pack. "I didn't say I couldn't." He set to work. The first attempt accomplished nothing. He switched tools, adjusted his angle, and tried again. Still nothing. Zavala held his staff closer to give him more light without a word. Brom crouched down beside him, peering at the lock with great interest and absolutely no understanding of what he was looking at. "You almost got it?" he asked. "Brom." "Right. Sorry." The third attempt produced a soft click that echoed in the narrow hall. Fallon let out a slow breath, tucked his tools away, and stood. He looked at the other two with an expression that suggested the whole thing had been perfectly routine. "Told you," he said, and pushed the door open. The door swung slowly inward, and the three stepped through. The room was like the hall, smooth walls shaped by magic, untouched by the age that had worn everything else in the tomb to dust. In the center stood a stone sarcophagus, and to either side a small pedestal. The one on the left held a row of books, each outlined in a faint glow. The one on the right held a sword, its blade catching Zavala's light, throwing it back in silver, a red gem gleaming within its pommel. The three looked at one another with wide smiles. "Think we found it," Brom said, and pushed forward, nudging the other two into the room ahead of him. Zavala steadied himself and turned to the big man. "I believe you are correct, my friend." He then turned to the half-elf. "Well, what are you waiting for, bard? Gather your prize." Fallon looked from the sword to the sarcophagus to the books, his eyes lingering on the tomes a moment longer than they should have. "Right," he said. "My prize," and stepped forward. The air turned cold. His breath came out as a fog as he stopped. A ghostly figure rose from the sarcophagus, its eyes fixed on the bard. Fallon knew from his studies exactly who this was. The fur-lined breastplate, the long, thick hair, the heavy beard. The warrior's build. But mostly he knew from their eyes. Their piercing gaze said in every account was able to stop men in their tracks. Blue, just as the stories told, though the whole apparition shimmered in the same cold hue. Haverl. Behind him he heard Brom take a slow step back and Zavala draw a quiet breath. "You are not the first to come, and you will not be the last," the apparition said, its gaze moving slowly from the sword to the sarcophagus to the books. "But know this. You may only take what is most valued out with you." The blue eyes settled back on Fallon. "Choose wisely." Fallon looked from the books to the sword, then back again. A warrior would take the sword without a second thought, and Haverl had been a warrior to his bones. But Fallon was not a warrior. He was a bard and a lore seeker. He knew without any doubt that knowledge outlasted any blade. Without hesitation, he crossed to the pedestal on the left and gathered the tomes carefully into his arms. The ghostly figure followed his movements. "Your choice is made," it said, and slowly faded until the cold left the room and the air was still again. Fallon turned back with a grin. "Knowledge is always most valued," he said, and started for the door. Zavala looked at him, then back at the empty pedestal. "I think you chose poorly." "Me too," Brom said. "That'd be a mighty shiny sword." Zavala looked at Brom. "I did not mean the sword." His eyes drifted to the sarcophagus. "Let us hope I am wrong." Fallon stepped past them both, clutching the books to his chest. "Knowledge is always best. The whole pen is mightier thing," he said, and headed back down the hall. The other two followed behind, and as they made their way back to the chamber of the dead, Fallon realized that the wizard had been right. he had made the wrong choice. A dozen red points of light stared back at him from where eyes had not been before. The guardians had awoken, their rust-covered weapons drawn, barring their way. Fallon dropped the books, drew his short sword, and readied himself. Zavala stepped in beside him and gave him a slow, knowing look. Brom didn't wait. He dropped his pack beside the wizard and charged past both of them with a bellowing roar, maul held in both hands. "Brom!" Fallon screamed. The first swing took the heads off 2 guardians at once. They crumbled to the ground in a shower of ancient bone and rusted iron. But the big man was more experienced with his maul as a tool than as a fighter's weapon, and the mighty swing carried him through a full rotation. His eyes met Fallon's across the chamber. In that brief moment, a lifetime of emotions crossed his face. Elation at felling the walking dead, then fear as he registered where the blow had left him, and finally, stunned surprise as a rusty blade pierced his back and burst through the front of his leather jerkin. "Brom!" the half-elf shouted, but stood frozen, the word dying in his throat. Zavala sighed, reached down and picked up Brom's pack, then looked at the stunned Fallon. "Alter Destani," he said, and placed a hand on the bard's shoulder. A moment later, they were standing at the entrance to Grey Gelen, the dark maw of the tomb behind them, the warm valley wind on their faces. Fallon grabbed the wizard's robes. "Wait! Take us back! We have to help him!" Zavala looked at him calmly. "You and I both know we cannot." "We can jump back in. Grab him. You can jump us to a healer," Fallon said, his eyes filling with tears. "We can—" "I cannot." Zavala's voice was not unkind. "The spell can only blink us a short distance, and our friend is already lost." Fallon didn't hold back, fell to his knees, and sobbed. The black-robed wizard looked down at him for a long moment. I am sorry for your loss," he said quietly. "It is a tragic tale." He paused. "But is that not the bread and butter of a bard?"